So today I'm going to be starting on my farthingale. This is a Spanish farthingale, not a wheel farthingale. I don't particularly like how wheel farthingales look, but it's also just not appropriate for the project. So I wanted to give a little bit of correction to the history of the farthingale that I gave. For the most part, what I said in my intro video for Frau was correct. The Spanish farthingale was brought over by Catherine of Aragon when she came to England from Spain in 1501. It didn't become popular until a little bit later, and it was worn pretty widely. You can even find portraits of Queen Elizabeth wearing the Spanish farthingale before she decided to adopt the wheel farthingale instead. However, the thing that I didn't realize is that the really famous painting of a Spanish farthingale is actually from the late 1400s rather than anywhere in the 1500s. So that's from about I think it was 1487. And this shows the farthingales as the outermost layer of the decorative part of the gown. I think this painting is used a lot as an example for the Spanish farthingale because it's one of the only paintings where you can really visibly see the garment with the canes or boning around it, whereas usually we just kind of assume it's there under all of the layers of gown or whatever else we can actually see. When you Google Spanish farthingale, that's what comes up. That was what we saw in our PowerPoints for learning costume history. That's just kind of what I think everybody thinks of when they think of a Spanish farthingale, and it's not wrong. That is essentially what it looks like. It's a tube of fabric and it's got the boning channels for the hooping. Not wrong, but not quite the look that I'm going for. So I'm not going to be using a decorative fabric to do this. I'm going to be using something that I have in my stash. It's also just not even going to be remotely historically accurate in terms of fiber content. I'm going to be using up some of my poly satin. However, the weave type of satin is documented to have been used for farthingales. In the Tudor Tailor, they suggest that you use a canvas for farthingales, and I was originally going to do that, but then I looked around some more and I thought about how linen canvas is really scratchy. It's gonna catch on whatever layer is over top of it, so I'm gonna be making a kirtle to go over my farthingale and under my gown. I just was thinking about how with undergarments you kind of want them to be made of something that's not super scratchy or will cause a lot of friction against the upper layers. You want your upper layers to kind of be able to move smoothly without catching and getting a little bit disheveled looking, if that makes sense. So I don't think that canvas is quite the right choice for the farthingale. I don't know, it probably was historically used. I'm not disputing that at all. The Tudor Tailor does great research and I'm sure that they have their evidence for it, but I was thinking that I probably want something that will have a little bit more slip and allow for the overlayers to kind of move a little more smoothly over this farthingale layer. And it does seem like that was historically used, so I'm not too far off base with that. I'll be using a polyester satin because that's what I've got in my stash. The only other evidence that we have of the actual farthingale garment, besides just knowing that that is what causes the silhouette, is that there is an extant garment that I think is in one of the Patterns of Fashions book and is in a museum in Spain, and that one does show all of the rungs that we expect to see in a farthingale. For this garment, I don't have a specific pattern. I'm not using a commercial pattern or anything. I'm going to be using tutorial from elizabethancostuming.net. I believe that's the URL. I'll link it below and I'll post it here. That is less of a pattern and more of a diagram for cutting. So basically you just have your piece of fabric and you cut it into triangles, and I'll show all of this later, but you are kind of constrained by how wide your fabric is. I'm gonna try to pick really wide fabric because I do want my skirt to be pretty wide, because this is more of a fantasy thing than a historical thing. Alcega's farthingale is the one that is in Patterns of Fashion, I believe, and is definitely the most well-known and has an actual cutting diagram, and is also the one that the Elizabethan Costuming website is referring to with this cutting diagram. I'm going to be making it a little bit more exaggerated than all of these sources suggest. My one concern for this is similar to the trouble that I had with my Alice crinoline, and that's the fact that the back of the skirt is going to be a lot heavier than the front of the skirt because it's going to be trained. However, I'm hoping that because it's not a mullet skirt, because everything is going to be floor length, that will be a little bit less of a problem. If I need to, I'll put straps into everything again and hope that that works out, even if that is not correct at all. I also got more correct boning this time. I'm not using tutu steel. I got the heavy duty hoop steel this time. It's, I think, 3/8 of an inch, and it's very heavy. So I hope this is hefty enough to hold up all my skirts, unlike my problems with the Alice skirt where everything wanted to swing forward because the back was a lot heavier, and just like my steel was collapsing because it just wasn't substantial enough. So this should take care of at least one of those problems. I think that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna get started with looking at this cutting diagram and get to cutting everything. Awesome. All right, did some math and I came up with something a little bit different. And the original Alcega diagram uses fabric that was 22 inches wide, just because that was how it was woven. So most fabric today is 44 inches wide or 60 inches wide. So it's pretty easy to just cut that down the length and get the 22 inches wide. That is what this blog suggests. However, I want mine to be very wide. I want a big skirt. So I'm gonna be using 60-inch wide fabric and going ahead with it as though 30 inches was the same thing as 22 inches. So that'll give me a hem of 172 inches, which is very large. If I decide that I don't want the full width of these, I can always make the hoops smaller, but I can't really make the fabric bigger. So I figured it was better to err on the side of maybe too wide, and then I can just narrow the hoops down a little bit if necessary. Essentially what you do for this is you take your waist to floor measurement and add 5 inches and then double that, and that's how much fabric you'll need. So I need 92 inches of fabric, and then everything is just kind of cutting things in squares and rectangles. We've got a front and a back piece, and those are both the same. Those are going to be 30 by 46 for me. The side gores get more pieces of fabric that are the same, like 30 by 46, and then just cut them diagonally down the middle, leaving a little bit more space for the back gores to have extra waist space, so it's a little bit more gathered in the back. That seems to be pretty much it. It seems fairly straightforward. Hopefully it plays out as straightforward as it sounds. Oh, one really important thing to note is that when you're putting all of this together, and this will make more sense when I'm actually like putting it together, but when you sew the triangles together, each triangle will have one straight of grain side and one bias side. You want to make sure that you're sewing a straight of grain to a bias. You never want to sew bias to bias, because then that seam will stretch out over time. Because farthingales are foundation garment, they are a structural garment that's going to be holding a lot of weight, and they're holding the tension of the hoops. You don't want that to stretch out. So you really want to make sure that every seam includes at least one straight of grain edge, so you don't get any stretching on that bias. Okay, I've gotten all of my hoop channels done. It looks like a prom dress. So to put these in, I did the bottom one first because that's just on the hem, and then I marked 6.5 inches up from the bottom because I wanted them to be 6 inches apart. By marking it an extra ½ inch up, then I could just line up the cut edge of these strips, and then I wouldn't have to guess where the actual stitching line was. I just had to line up the cut edge and then stitch a ½ inch from that line. Then I pressed it all up after it was stitched, folded under a ½ inch at the top edge, and then top stitched that down. It's not like the prettiest, and it's obviously not historically accurate at all because there were no sewing machines at this time. However, it got it done real fast, so that's great. The next thing to do is to insert hoops into this whole thing. I did get quite a bit of hooping. I got 30 meters, which I think is like 90 feet. So just in case I make mistakes, I do have a lot of extra, so no worries there. The first thing I want to do is see if I can actually utilize the full width of this sewn out hoop casings. I don't know that I really want it to be this wide. This is a very large skirt, but I want to first make sure that even if I do make it this wide, the kirtle's going to make it over that whole width. If it doesn't, then obviously I'll have to make it a little bit smaller. So I'm gonna get my kirtle pattern. I haven't had a mock-up, but like the skirt's probably gonna stay the same. It's just the bodice that'll change once I do the actual kirtle mock-up. I'm gonna take that skirt pattern, lay it on top of this, and just see if it even can contain all of this farthingale. So first off, the kirtle is not long enough to cover the farthingale. Second, the kirtle is just slightly too narrow to really cover it, and I don't want it to be like really spread out. So I am gonna make the hoops a little bit smaller than this farthingale, which will be okay. I think that'll help with like any adjustability. It's probably about 5 inches short on the half, so that's about 10 inches short actually, and I'm gonna measure how wide this is all around there and then make it so that is like 1.5 how big my hoops are, if that makes sense. So like for instance, if the entire distance of the hem was 15 inches, then I would make the farthingale 10 inches. Hopefully that makes sense. Obviously that's much smaller than it actually is, but we're gonna just go with that. Hopefully this works. Really quickly. I don't think it's big enough with the 100-inch hoop. This is even 110 inches. So I think I am going to use the full width of this fabric, and we're going to just adjust the pattern of the kirtle later. I think that looks okay. I don't know if it's too big. I'm going to keep going, and if it ends up being wrong, then I will fix it. But I think that is an okay hoop in that hoop channel. Great. Hello. What's that? So in addition to the farthingale, I'm also going to be making a bum roll just because I want the back of the skirt to be a little bit more supported. I'm going to make a bum roll to go under the farthingale, and hopefully that should give a little bit more support in the back and help the train skirt not do the annoying thing. I've made a Victorian bum roll before, and they are a little bit, they're more crescent roll shaped rather than like actual crescent moon shaped, whereas Tudor bum rolls are more of a skinny shape like this. So they go around the hips as well, but because Victorian skirts kind of have a more cupcake, I mean, this is not a great example because it kind of does the cupcakey thing anyways, but you can see that it flares out and is more triangular shaped. So Victorian skirts are more cupcake shaped. Obviously, this is not a historical painting or anything. This is just fan art, but this is a little bit more cupcake shaped. And with actual Victorian skirts, it's even more cupcake shaped. So this is just kind of like, meh. So Victorian bum rolls tend to have a lot more padding in the back to really emphasize that. I can't remember if I ever found out if real Victorian people used bum rolls or not. Oh well. They're definitely used in Tudor times. There is like actual evidence of it from paintings, so there's that. But they are a little bit skinnier and more noodle-like than the Victorian ones. I think that looks pretty okay. It's a little bit wide down here. I made it 4 inches, but my hope is that once I stuff it, it'll kind of like become sausage-like. The farthingale was a success. I think it looks really good. I guess the real test will be whether it still looks good with all the skirts on it, because that ended up being my really big problem with Alice. I made the cage crinoline for that one and it looked really cute and it was great with the petticoats, and then once I stuck the skirt on it, it just all swung forward. So I'm really hoping that is not the case with this farthingale. If not, then I'll probably stick straps in them again, but I'm just gonna cross my fingers and hope that I don't have to do that. The other thing that I realized while I was trying to arrange the fabric around the hoops, because the fabric is much wider than the hoops, so there is a lot of room in the channels for the hoops to go around. So at first I was trying to push all of the extra fabric to the front because I was like, oh, it should be gathered in the front, right? That was wrong. It's completely backwards. So all of your extra fabric should go to the back so that the front is really smooth and the back has all of the volume. Makes sense once I say it out loud, but looking at it, I was like, this is how it should work. All your volume in the back and it will make that nice kind of elliptical, like push out in the back silhouette rather than having it all bow out in the front. So I'm hoping that will be enough to like defeat gravity and like make it sit how I want it to, but we'll see. I'll keep you guys updated. For the bum roll, that was super simple as well. It's something that I have never really thought of like looking for a pattern for. I'm sure there are patterns, but it's really just like a little crescent roll that you just stuff with lots of fabric scraps. I did something a little bit different this time for the attachment. I ended up just doing 2 long strips of 1-inch twill tape so I could tie it in a bow. And I did that this time because when I did the hooks and eyes for my bum roll for Alice, it all ended up needing to shift around so much that where I had originally placed the hook and eye just was not relevant anymore. I think that was a better solution. I did put a hook and eye on the farthingale, and then it turns out that once I've got the petticoat on, it doesn't fit over the linen buckram anyways. So I luckily had also put a tie into that one just in case, so that worked out better. It seems like things that are adjustable are much better for pre-Victorian time periods because your body fluctuates just on a like hourly basis, and having that adjustability is really useful. Figuring out the hoop sizes was kind of done by trial and error. Ended up doing the bottom one first, I believe, because then I was like, okay, if it's too big, I can just cut it down a little bit, but if it's too small, then I can just put it in one of the higher rungs. So rather than start from the very top, whereas if that one was too small, then I wouldn't be able to use it for anything, I decided to go from the bottom up and put the hooping in and looked at it and visually looked at it with my eyeballs to see if it looked correct, and that's as much explicit instruction that I can give you guys for those sizes if you are wanting to go bigger than what the Alcega diagram suggests. I think that's all of it. It's fairly straightforward. It's mostly just sew some panels together, stitch on some channels, and put in some steel, and like that's it. It's not one of those things where it's like you say the thing out loud and it's like, oh, but it's so much more complicated than that. It's really not more complicated than that. So that's about all I got. Yeah, so thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you plan on making your own farthingale, let me know. I would love to see it. I say this in the comments a lot. If you have a project that was inspired by anything I did, or even is just like similar and you want to share it with the world, like tag me in it. I would love to see it. I would love to see what you guys are working on. I did not get into costuming just because I want to stare at my own work all day. Tag me if you're on Instagram. If not, figure out some way to tag me and I'll figure out a way to see it. If you have suggestions, if you think I did something wrong, it is known to happen, so also let me know with that. And if you want to see the rest of this series, the next video is gonna be the kirtle. I'm super excited to work on the kirtle. Actually, the fabric I got is so sparkly and so silly looking, but I really love how it looks, so I'm excited to work on it because I get to stare at pretty fabric for a while. So if you're interested in seeing the kirtle and the rest of the series, please subscribe. I would love to see you in the next video, so I will see you guys next time. Bye!